$1 trillion, according to a Penn Wharton study. There was a question that was asked, I believe, by Jackie Heinrich. Basically, they were pushing the Biden White House and saying, how do you know it's paid for if you don't know what it costs? The Biden White House is refusing to tell us what this student loan bribe costs. And so rightfully, Jackie Heinrich is asking the question, okay, how do you know it's paid for if you don't know what it costs? This reminds me of when my wife would go out shopping and she'd come back with all these bags and I'd be like, well, what it cost? I don't know. But you paid for it. Well, that's not very helpful, right? You ever been around Christmas? Maybe it's you. Maybe it's the husband. Maybe it's the wife. They go out shopping and you're trying to figure out what they actually spent, and there isn't any indication of what has been spent or what the cost of something was. It's kind of the Biden White House right now. But the Penn Wharton study suggests it's going to cost $1 trillion. So if you thought you didn't have any student loan debt, guess what? You're wrong. You got $1 trillion share now. $6,000, I think, on average per family. I paid off my student loans. I hope that you did as well. Why in the world now am I supposed to take on somebody else's student loans? And fortunately, I was able to go to college and go to grad school, but a lot of people weren't. And you know what? The truth of the matter is, I went to a lower caliber college because they gave me a scholarship. Full disclosure, I applied for college at the University of Virginia, Wake Forest, Davidson College, and George Washington and Georgetown. I turned down those other schools because I got a scholarship to George Washington University, and I didn't want to spend full freight and end up in debt too much by going to those schools. A lot of you did. A lot of you may have chosen to go, I graduated in 3 years too, to try to reduce the cost of my overall college education. A lot of you did the same thing. So let me just ask you this question. Why should you be punished for that? Why should parents who saved money for their kids so they didn't have to take out loans be punished because other parents didn't? This is fundamentally wrong, okay? Student loans are the obligation of the student. They actually are going to make cost of higher education worse. And so I would just point out that Joe Biden doesn't have the constitutional authority. I would encourage you to go back and listen to yesterday's show if you want me to lay out all of those arguments. But the Biden administration right now is simultaneously arguing that Title 42 can't be enforced at the border because the COVID emergency is over, and that they need to be able to spend $1 trillion on student loan debt removal, the big bribe, by saying that the COVID emergency is remaining. So how, on the one hand, do you argue COVID's over to open up the border, and on the other hand, argue that COVID is still an issue when it comes to you and your ability to cancel out $1 trillion in debt? And some people out there right now are saying, what about the PPP loans? Well, first of all, the legislative branch passed the PPP, all right? So that went through the legislative approval, whether you agree or disagree with it. Larger context, the reason why PPP existed was because the federal government told everyone that they were shutting down people's ability to work, and businesses wouldn't have been able to make payroll and keep their employees paid, given the fact that the government was shutting down the entire country, unless the PPP existed. We still hit, I think it was like 20% unemployment. It would have been far higher. Now, you're talking to a guy who was completely opposed to the idea of shutdowns, to the idea of lockdowns over COVID. I was completely opposed to that. I didn't ever stop working. I don't think I missed a day. So I was all in on fighting against that. But you can't compare something that the president is doing with the stroke of a pen with what occurred with the PPP. And the fact that the White House is now leaking out. Now, look, I never took any PPP money. So I got a business. I never took any money. I was able to continue I kept everybody that was on our staff, all those things. I took a pay cut so that people didn't have to get fired in the places where I worked, at Fox, at iHeart. I took pay cuts, all that stuff, okay? But people had to take that in many instances. I didn't, so I'm pretty consistent here. But when you're going to leak people's names and the fact that they took PPP, and you're going to hold them accountable for that when it went through the legislative process and was passed. I'll be honest with you. If Congress in the Senate and the House passed a $1 trillion debt reduction act on student loans, I would disagree with it, but I would acknowledge that Joe Biden had the authority to sign that bill and make it happen. It didn't go through the legislative process. This is not permissible. It is not going to stand, in my opinion, on a constitutional basis.